Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Audra Simons and Rachel Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and industry transformation initiatives impacting governments, enterprises, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachel Lyon, here with my co-host, Audra Simons.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm great. We're changing it up today, recording on a Friday. How fun is that?
Exactly. And the sun is out. It's beautiful. Got to enjoy it. What better to do than a podcast on a Friday?
That's right. And guess who we have? I am so excited. Today, we welcome back to the podcast, actually, Eric Goldstein. He is the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity for the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or better known as CISA, as I think most people know it. In this role, he leads CISA's mission to protect and strengthen federal civilian agencies and the nation's critical infrastructure against cyber threats. What an exciting job. Welcome back, Eric.
It is great to be back. So excited to be here on a Friday, and we are finally out of summer here in the DC area. So hopefully after this podcast, we can all go for a walk outside.
Oh, that would be amazing. I haven't done that in months. So, Audra, you're going to kick it off today. What are we going to jump into?
So where I wanted to jump off is, one, it said that leaders in CISA like security so much that it's important that they put it in their name twice. So in that same rationale, let's kick off with talking about CISA's first ever cybersecurity strategy plan that you're putting in place for 24 to 26. If you're happy to kick off there, Eric.
I would love to. There's no first topic that is near to my heart. So, it's been I think, really big year for cybersecurity strategies, right? So we began with the National Cybersecurity Strategy coming out of our friends in the White House, in the Office of National Cyber Director and the National Security Council. And that strategy, of course, really orients our national and even global course for improved cybersecurity, including how we really shift accountability for cybersecurity to those who are able to bear it. Our agency at CISA, of course, earlier released our agency's strat plan, which outlines how we as an agency are going to work across our partners to achieve our cohesive vision to reduce risks to both cyber and physical infrastructure. But we recognize that there really was a gap, which is subordinate to the National Cybersecurity Strategy and our agency strategic plan. There's a question of where are we focused in our cybersecurity mission? And most importantly, how do we know if we're succeeding? So we were really excited to release our first ever, as Audra kindly noted, cybersecurity strategic plan, which covers the next 3 fiscal years. Doesn't actually even go into effect until 2 weeks from today with the beginning of fiscal year 24. And the reason why we structured it that way is because we're making some really ambitious, even audacious steps forward in this strat plan, principally because we are for the first time outlining measures of effectiveness that actually will show whether or not national cybersecurity is getting better or worse, and in many ways, whether we at CISA are making best use of taxpayer money, are doing our jobs in contributing to that positive change. And so some of these are really true outcome metrics, like can we, in fact, track progress in reduced impacts from cyber incidents affecting American organizations. Some of them are measures that we think are well correlated with those outcomes, like can we track real adoption of our cybersecurity performance goals? Can we track progress in more quickly remediating known exploited vulnerabilities? Adoption of our shared services. But really, we are trying to, as they say in the financial sector, mark ourselves to market here and really hold ourselves accountable to do the work that we say that we should be doing. Most of the content of the strat plan, things like drive secure by design, roll out effective shared services, respond and coordinate cyber incidents. This is the work that CISA does every day, but for the first time, we're putting on paper and saying publicly, here's how we're going to do it. And then one other point that I'll mention in the strat plan that I'm really proud of is the strat plan contains 4 principles. A few of them are things that would be intuitive. Cybersecurity is a whole of nation, government, society mission. But there's two that I think are unique. One is our need to prioritize our resources to have the greatest impact, right? Because we know that the cybersecurity problem facing our country is enormous, in many ways unmanageable for one organization to handle alone. And so at CISA, we need to partner, but also prioritize. And so we make clear in the strat plan the groups, the entities that we need to serve first. For example, those entities that are, as we call them, target-rich cyber poor, and those entities that are essential to national critical functions. And then finally, we note our principle of achieving impact or failing fast, and the needing to be disciplined across what's working, what's not working, and if something's not working, celebrate a fast pivot and move on to something that is.
So could you focus in a little bit on some of the comments that you made around shifting the burden of cybersecurity to those who can bear it? What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So if we look at the history of cybersecurity, a lot of the focus has fallen upon the end user enterprise, hospitals, small businesses, school districts, to say, patch faster, hunt for adversaries, make sure your users aren't clicking phishing links. And then when something goes wrong, we look at the victims. We look at the school district, at the hospital, at the water utility, and we say, how is it that you didn't patch that vulnerability faster? And we haven't looked at the technology manufacturers, the product vendors who are delivering products that, were they designed to be more secure by design and default in the first instance, could actually have prevented the incident from occurring in the first place. And so as one example, whenever there is a widespread intrusion campaign, the first question is, well, how many organizations have patched the vulnerability that is being exploited? And if they didn't patch fast enough, why not? What did that victim do wrong? Well, we know in reality, the velocity of new vulnerabilities is more than almost any organization can keep up with. And certainly organizations like small school districts, small businesses, there's just no hope. And so we should ask the question, well, why are there so many vulnerabilities to begin with? And are there steps that the product vendor could have taken, either to eliminate that vulnerability before the product went to market, or are there stronger default controls that the product vendor could have put in place to mitigate the likelihood of that vulnerability being exploited to cause harm? Certainly, this is not to say that enterprises have no burden for their own security. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of work that enterprises have to do, but the accountability has been dramatically shifted towards the enterprise. And we think, consistent with the national cybersecurity strategy, that recalibration to focus on technology manufacturers and product vendors is really what's needed.
So
I like that. I like that. Sorry, I do want to talk about the. It sounds like a nice dovetail into the open source. There was the open source software security roadmap too, that you've recently been talking about. Yes,
that's exactly right. And I think open source is a uniquely critical and uniquely complicated aspect of this ecosystem, right? Because for proprietary software, it is fairly trivial for us, either through guidance or through our shared role as customers, to ask major technology companies to design and build software in a different way. It is a different proposition in open source, when in fact we know that open source projects that underpin everything we do every day across sectors are developed and maintained by volunteers without any expectation of compensation, but who often are under-resourced to actually put in place the investment in security that would be expected of a commercial provider. And so, what our goal is through our open source security roadmap is really act as a leading partner in the open source community to figure out how can we drive resources to those open source projects that are most critical to government and critical infrastructure sectors. And then how can we look for points of leverage in the ecosystem? One area that we're really excited about working on are the intermediaries, the repositories, the package managers that are in fact how most organizations consume open source packages and libraries. And we think that those intermediaries, as one example, can do a lot more to remove malicious packages before they're ingested, to nudge developers towards the most recent non-vulnerable version of a given package or library. It's remarkable that the percentage of versions of Log4j that are still being downloaded today, a lot of them are the vulnerable versions. And that's, we can as a society, as a community, do better. And so we think that, both by partnering with the community, by supporting the developers and maintainers who really do heroic work in building technology that all of us rely on, but also looking for points of leverage to drive positive change, we think that we can make progress even in this uniquely diverse ecosystem.
So can we go from your kind of strategic plans to talking about some of the biggest cyber attacks that happened during 2023?
Well, certainly.
So if we start talking about kind of the June hack of MOVEit, the file transfer software, which is like the largest breach so far this year, that impacted more than 1,000 organizations and 60 million individuals. From that incident, what are some of the biggest lessons to come out of that in terms of, how has that changed your thinking? How has that kind of influenced your strategic plans and things that you're working towards?
Yeah, absolutely. It is certainly the case that, the impact of the widespread campaign targeting MOVEit managed file transfer application, had real impacts for, a wide range of MOVEit customers. I think there's a few takeaways that we draw from that campaign. The first is the extraordinary speed with which adversaries utilize new vulnerabilities to execute intrusions. And, it used to be that there was a window of days, even weeks, before a new vulnerability would be exploited, at least at scale. Usually you'd see some proof of concepts trickle out. You would see, some initial intrusions, but it would be a bit before we would see a global campaign unfold. And now we're seeing these campaigns unfold in hours from the vulnerability being initially disclosed. The second is, we are seeing adversaries, particularly ransomware groups, focus on very similar types of applications. This is at least the third campaign that the Clop group has undertaken, targeting very similar kinds of applications, doing very similar things. So I do think that should cause us to reflect on how we harden those applications that we know are being targeted by adversaries rampantly. And, if there were three, there will probably be a fourth and a fifth, where these kind of groups look for other ways to monetize these vulnerabilities. And then I think the third, really, without speaking about the practices of any given company, again, does take us back to our secure by design doctrine, which is, there are, as long as humans are developing code, there will always be some flaws that we missed before production. But we know that we as a community can do better. And we know that a lot of the vulnerabilities that are so prevalent, whether they're memory safety issues, whether they are issues like SQL injection, we know how to fix these vulnerabilities, and we've known in some cases for decades. And so I think reflecting on the practices of the vendors who we are relying on so ubiquitously, should cause us to take a step back and make sure that we're driving incentives in the right direction.
And I will say on this particular, incident with the Clop group, I noticed that there's a $10 million bounty, that the U.S. State Department put out there, which I like, right? Because there has to be ramifications, there has to be accountability, and I know that sometimes, or a lot of times, that struggles, right, in terms of capturing the people that are executing these attacks because they live in the shadows, or maybe they're in a country where it's acceptable for what they're doing and they're protected in that way. Do you see more of that happening in terms of accountability and bringing these folks in?
Yeah, we have to figure out as a society, and really globally, how to increase costs for these adversaries, because we know that for these ransom groups, they are seeking financial gain. It is really purely an economic calculation. Exactly. And so the more that we can do to increase the marginal cost of a given attempted intrusion or a given campaign, whether it is by taking action against their infrastructure, seizing some of their financial gain, taking law enforcement action to actually take them out of commission, or improving our defenses such that their success rate per target reduces, those are all steps that increase the marginal cost of a given campaign. If we can ratchet that cost high enough, at a certain point, these groups are going to decide perhaps ransomware is not the most cost-effective type of crime to be involved in. And that's really the future that we have to build towards. But that really does require an all-solutions approach where we are focusing not only on defense, but also on activities that impose cost on these adversaries in other ways.
Absolutely. Particularly when I think IBM had estimated that it's about 9.9 billion, something around there, that is the estimated cost to those affected by this particular attack. It's kind of staggering, that kind of amount.
It's huge. So talking on other kind of areas, like more with a focus on, how do companies or large organizations recover from these kind of cyber attacks. So T-Mobile, they fell victim to 2 data breaches this year, which compromised the personal information and data of about 37 million user accounts.
And now, I was one of them. I got a lot of notifications, just saying.
Excellent. You were like, I was breached. Awesome. So Eric, how do you recommend, or how are you recommending and laying out strategic plans on how to recover when these things happen?
Yeah, without speaking about a company's recovery from a particular incident, first of all, Rachel, I think well that we've in many ways normalized these sort of letters, right? I mean, we all get them,
exactly.
a few times a year, and we say, well, at this point, 2023, what do we do? That's just life in the modern era. I do think that what we see increasingly is sometimes, unfortunately, a crisis is the best opportunity for a company to really reinvest in and recapitalize both its security and resilience program. We know that ultimately cybersecurity is not a technical issue or a technical decision. It is a business decision, right? Yep. And where we see breaches occur, it is almost never because there was a at its core a technical flaw, right? It is almost always a business decision, in many cases at the time, a reasonable business decision that led to a choice to not deploy a control, to not conduct security testing to an appropriate threshold on a product, to not deploy a security feature on down the line. And there are dozens of these, but what these breaches offer, almost universally, is a chance for the business to step back and say, as we think through how we prioritize and invest against the enterprise risks that we are facing, how do we think about cybersecurity? And unfortunately, because truly impactful cyber incidents are fairly rare, a fortunate fact overall, in many cases, driving that business change by way of analogy, saying, see what happened over here, works to some extent, but in many cases, it takes, either a real near miss or an actual impactful breach to change that business culture. That's one reason why at CISA, we are so focused on speaking not only to CISOs and their teams, which really is preaching to the very well converted, but also talking to board directors, talking to business leaders, talking to general counsel about what this risk looks like, what the trend lines in the threat that we are facing really are, and how now is the time to really invest in cybersecurity as a critical driver of business risk and an enabler of business success, and not solely as a technical or IT issue.
And do you think, you can't escape AI right now? I mean, it's everywhere. And do you see that potentially helping people maybe accelerate some of that thinking? Everywhere I look, it's security and AI. What are we going to do? How do we do it? How do you regulate it? It's just such an enormous, kind of a threat factor that is kind of squishy, right? With no defined lines, if you will. And how do you secure against that? But also, the regulations, right? Is that something that you guys are seeing kind of bubble up a lot?
Absolutely. I think probably every conversation any of us are in these days, AI comes in at least once, if not dominating the dialogue. I think Rachel, you framed it as how do we respond to the threats posed by AI? How do we regulate or address the harms? It's also the question of how do we benefit?
Right.
And so I think, as a cybersecurity community, I think the challenge we face is to, let's not let our conceptualization of AI risks be a failure of imagination, right? Let's really think through not only what these models and tools can be used for today, but what they might be used for 2 years from now, 5 years from now, recognizing the extraordinary trajectory of innovation here, but also make sure that our operators, our defenders, our analysts are fully benefiting from these tools. And already, even in the relatively early days of commercial AI solutions, we're already seeing security tools adopt AI in really meaningful, impactful ways.
Yes.
And I think if we think through some of these strategic challenges, for example, products with insecure code, well, AI can be maybe the only way to address that problem at real scale. And so I think, we are certainly at CISA really excited about the pro-security benefits that AI may have. We are trying to work with the community to really think over the horizon about, well, today, GPTs can be used to write better phishing emails. Well, that's great, but what's it going to look like in 2 years from now? Let's think ahead of that. And so really making sure that we are leaning forward in the benefits of AI while being really thoughtful about how we manage the risks.
I like what you said there, because it does make me excited too, to think that this could be a possibility to help us maybe not catch up to maybe the attackers, if you will, because they always seem to be, kind of so far ahead. But I love the idea of kind of, shortening that gap between the two, because ultimately, we want to get ahead of them. And I think there's just so many opportunities for AI. I'm really, really excited to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to jump off here and start talking a little bit about Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Yes. Did you know it's the 20th annual, Eric? I didn't realize 20th annual.
It is
exactly
pretty remarkable.
Wow. I mean, yeah.
Shows you we're in a long running.
It's a long
thing.
game.
Cybersecurity is not going away. So as part of celebrations for the 20th annual Cybersecurity Awareness Month this October, CISA is releasing a new awareness program that shares 4 steps that people can take to be safer online. Eric, can you talk to us about that?
I most definitely can. First of all, Cybersecurity Awareness Month is really a great opportunity to make sure that we are not only talking within these same communities that we're always talking to, but that we are actually reaching out to individuals across the country from every walk of life to make sure that they understand that cybersecurity isn't just a technical issue that their IT person will take care of, but something that really we can all focus on. And so our goal with our Secure Our World rollout this October is really to focus on a few simple things that all of us can do. Steps like making sure that we're using strong passwords, ideally managed by a password generator, that we're using multi-factor authentication, ideally the phishing-resistant kind, that we know how to, of course, recognize and report phishing emails, and that we're making sure that the software we're running is updated and that we have auto-update on. I think one exciting piece here as well is that we're also, because everything we do here is pushing secure by design, we're also including a bit of a ask your vendor aspect to this, because I think all of us, if we think through those 4 areas, one thing that will pop into our heads is, oh, my bank doesn't offer multi-factor authentication, or I want to use a strong password, but my doctor's office lets me use ABC 1 2 3. And those are all things that we need to drive a grassroots movement to say, if your provider is letting you use ABC 1 2 3 as a password, if your bank or your retailer isn't offering an option of multi-factor authentication, ideally by default, if you're using a product that doesn't enable auto update, ask why. And if enough of us ask that question, why, that's how we really drive a cultural change to say, I don't even want the option to use an insecure password. I don't want the option not to turn on MFA. I don't want an option to have to worry about finding the silly auto update radio button. I want all that to be done by default every time. Right. And the less that we can push down to everyday users and the more that we can have done for us, that's how we really get to that future where our world is demonstrably more secure.
I like the kind of the speaking out part, because I have to say I have some doctors that send me links, text messages, link to pay. And I'm like, but you can't log into the portal to do it. You have to pay only through this link and text message. And Eric, I'm quite nervous to click on that link. So I think it's wonderful, right? That you absolutely have to have these initiatives, because I think a lot of organizations think that they're kind of modernizing, but not really thinking about, all the vulnerabilities that could come with that, right? But again, security by design. I love that. How do we make that just everyday standard practice in what we do?
Right. And I think, if we think even about multi-factor authentication, for many people, carrying around a hardware token, might be more than they're going to do. But, having a soft token authenticator app on your mobile device isn't actually any harder than using SMS authentication, and it's much more secure. And frankly, it is fairly trivial to implement. And so, we'd love to get to a world to say where there is just an understanding that if your provider, doctor's office, bank, what have you, isn't providing you with these features, they're not securing your information. And the more that we can drive that from the bottom up, we think that's going to drive some really important change.
I totally agree. I have to admit, I have like 3 or actually no 4 different authenticators on my phone for different services, but a lot of that's work related.
I love it. So I do want to be mindful of time. So I'd love to talk a little bit more though about the Secure Our World campaign, because that sounds very exciting what you're kicking off there. And it's kicking off in the next couple of weeks as we kick off Cybersecurity Awareness Month?
That's exactly right. And I think, what we had a realization about here at CISA is Cybersecurity Awareness Month is great, right? It is our focus time, 4 weeks of the year. You really drive the message about the importance of cybersecurity across ideally every corner of our country and even around the world. But it's not enough, right? And we really need a sustained year-long campaign to keep driving the message. And so, as you noted, this is kicking off in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but it really is going to be our national scale campaign where our goal is to have that sustained message across different mediums, different audiences, different partners to make sure that ideally, we are not just making this a moment, we're making it a movement.
Love it.
And we can keep driving not only that adoption of the right practices by every American, but also, as I mentioned, make sure that every American is asking the right questions and really conveying the point that you have a right to be secure. And if your provider or your vendor is not giving you that right, you should ask why.
Yeah, I love that. I want to end on that. It's not just a moment, it's a movement. I think that's fantastic.
I also like the fact that you have a right to be secure.
I love that too. Yes. Because I don't know that people think that way.
They don't.
Yeah.
I don't believe they do.
They absolutely don't. And I think, to our prior point about we all receive these data breach letters, once a month and throw them in the trash. We have normalized this environment of insecurity, and there is work that government can do to help drive change. There's work that we can do to drive change through procurement, but really it's got to come from the millions of people who are using online services every day to really understand that we could live in a different world. We could live in a world where we have more trust and security in the products we use every day. But to have that world, we have to ask for it.
That's great. Yeah, take the power back because it's in our hands, right, to chart our destiny. I think that's fantastic. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast. This has been such a great conversation. I'm so excited for the kickoff of your campaign as well. I think it's such an important movement, and I look forward to following it throughout the year and how it expands and as folks kind of get on the program, so to speak. This absolutely needs to happen, and it's such a great time to start making that happen.
And on to the next 20 years of Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Exactly. It's exciting to think where we're going to be in 20 years. So to all of our listeners, thanks again for joining us. And until next time, stay secure. Thanks for joining us for the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by ForcePoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit forcepoint.com/govpodcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher.